All right, we're here at the SSA Convention 2025 in Cincinnati, Ohio with Ryan, who's from Bloomington, Indiana. Hi, Ryan.
Hello.
And we're here to ask you, how'd you get here? This is your second...
This is my second SSA conference.
And yet we didn't meet last year.
No, we did not.
No.
So my journey kind of starts with, how I was raised. I grew up Apostolic Pentecostal in the United Pentecostal denomination. They have other offshoots that are also Oneness Pentecostal, but ours is a smaller subset of that.
The true...
Sure, the true believers.
Apostolic, does that imply there's someone who is actually an apostle who leads it, or no?
It does not.
Okay, all right.
So the UPC is considered to be a cult by other Christian denominations.
Okay.
For a number of reasons, including the, discouraging people from, watching TV or reading the news or talking to people or family who aren't in the denomination at all. And that is something that I experienced, was having family cut off.
Not even having a relationship.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if you're even identify as basically you believe Jesus was raised from the dead, he was born of a virgin, all that kind of stuff.
It has to be UPC. Yeah. So, I grew up in that, and up until the age 13, there was some family personal drama with my mom and her family who was in the UPC. So there was a point where my mom, she had been abused herself by her mom and her dad while they were growing up in the UPC as well. And just when I was 13, there was kind of a blow up of my mom bringing up all of that stuff from the past and
Were you your only child, or do you have siblings?
I have 6 siblings. I am the middle child of 7.
Okay.
And so
everybody's affected.
Everybody's affected. And this is, this event happened when my oldest sister or oldest sibling was turning 18 and getting ready to go off to college. And part of this story is, migraines. Pentecostal worship services are very loud. Sometimes they'll have like lasers and fog machines, and attendance is usually considered compulsory. Like you'd go, 3 or 5 hour Sunday night worship service as well as a Sunday morning, and you'd have your Wednesday nights and then your Bible studies throughout the week if you're old enough to be in a Bible study group. Often you'll have a Friday a music concert where they'll have bands from other UPC churches across the country come and show off.
Show off.
Right.
Sorry. Nice delivery. So you were getting migraines and then having...
I was not.
Okay.
My oldest sister and my mom were. And they started to try to not go to as many services, and the other family who was in the UPC kind of blew up at them of, hey, why aren't you coming to church? Migraines are a made-up excuse to not come to church. Kind of a denial of, the health reality that they were going through.
Yeah.
And so I stopped going when I was 13. That didn't change my parents' point of view.
Everybody stopped going? You stopped going?
Myself, my parents, my siblings. Extended family on my mom's side, they resumed attendance as usual.
So did you all then not go anywhere that was quieter?
We just stopped going to, my parents tried out like 2 other UPC churches and found that they weren't any better. For some context, the church we originally were going to was downtown Indianapolis, and it was the mega church and kind of the focal point for the entire denomination. Like the UPC has satellite mega churches in other states, and then they have their smaller provincial ones.
Mega means there's how many people there?
2,000 or more.
Oh wow, it's huge.
Yeah. So stopped going when I was 13, and from there...
Was that traumatizing? Like you thought you guys were all backslidden or something like that?
Oh yeah, that's exactly, in my head, I'm like, oh my God, we're doomed.
Because by 13, most 13-year-olds are pretty confident. They see the world.
And, you know,
wisely.
Sunday school, you know, all of that. We also church camp every summer.
You're prepared to judge your parents by 13, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So what then happened? That there must, because that's like, oh, we are not doing what God wants, is probably your perspective at the time, at first.
Right.
But then.
So there was kind of an earlier memory of an initial doubt when I was about between 6 or 8 years old, right? Of, you know, I've been taught, you know, that God will directly answer my prayers no matter what they are, and that He loves me no matter what. So I had it in my head, you know, God will answer my prayers no matter what. So I said, okay, God, prove your existence by having one of my siblings come into my room and tell me to go do a chore in the next 10 minutes.
That's pretty clever to
right?
come up
So
with
it's
that
like, okay, God, I'm testing you. And this is something that, like, in the Old Testament, God says to test him, like, all the time. The Hebrews are just constantly, like, testing and then being shown directly miraculous intervention. So,
in all fairness, there's a few places there where He rebukes them for testing them, but oh well.
sure. But you still,
Oh well. You're 13.
there's a history of testing God in the Bible.
My only advice would have been, like, wasn't there a high degree of probability that among those 6 siblings, one would come in and tell you to go do your chores?
Yes, there was. And
Okay.
It's in hindsight that I'm looking at that memory and be like, that's kind of ridiculous that I was giving God such an easy
But
test.
if it had happened right at that time, you know.
Right.
you
So
would-
there was, you know, it didn't happen.
Guessing it didn't happen.
Didn't happen.
The one
so
time
there was
it
a
doesn't
couple of, you know, there was a couple of weeks where I was, you know, just, you know, little 6-year-old or 8-year-old self was just grumbling, grr, God isn't answering. I'm going to just not pray to Him every night like I usually do. And then just over time, I totally forgot about that and resumed the, you know, the belief in God and all that. And as time wore on, when I was about 15, we started doing musical theater. And that was an eye-opening experience. Because before that, okay, a little bit of extra context. I was homeschooled. So on top of being in a cult, I was also homeschooled. And then we stopped going to the cult. So it was just, you know, at our house. So it was very isolated.
Yeah.
And musical theater was the first, you know, large community I'd ever been exposed to that wasn't a church. And it was through there that, you know, I started to meet, you know, members of the LGBTQ plus community, or non-believers, or people who were not UPC
Theater
Christians.
kids. We're meeting theater kids.
Exactly.
That covers
Theater.
I think that covers it.
Yes. And just over time, I realized, like, my beliefs about, you know, not talking to other people were abrasive and didn't let me have, you know, fun social experiences like I saw other people, like, going out to dinner, you know, or having sleepovers, or just, you know, normal human social interaction. And I'm like, I want that. And I wasn't able to because of, you know, the religious beliefs that I had. And so over time, just kind of got really depressed because all of a sudden, I was aware of, you know, the joys of social interaction, and seeing that I wasn't getting that. And there was a particular production, we were doing Shakespeare's Macbeth, and just throughout that show, I got very depressed and kind of felt left out of the social activities and all that. And then I kept journals throughout this whole time, and
That was wise.
there was a point where we had the production of Macbeth, and then after the production of Macbeth, somewhere in between the end of the show and then they have a cast party, you know, a couple of months after it's finished, I had gone from, like, feeling judgmental towards myself and towards other people, you know, saying that God is, you know, we're all sinning and this is terrible, and to just, I had stopped thinking about God at all. And part of that was, you know, again, I had mentioned earlier, the belief that God is all-loving. I had realized, why would an all-loving God let me experience the emotions I was going through? You know, severe depression and suicidal thoughts and self-harm and that type of just not having a good time of being alive. So that was kind of the main point that really solidified, like, in my mind, I don't believe in a God, and I just have left it there from
Was
when
there
I was about
anybody there
17.
among the theater kids or in the social media world, YouTube, TikTok, or whatever? I don't know if you had access to that, but was there any people that you were talking to about their non-belief that had any kind of direct influence, or was it all just kind of this internal private
There
battle?
was some direct influence. My oldest sister, who I mentioned, she went off to St. Mary's of the Woods College in South Bend, Indiana, which is directly next to Notre Dame. And, it's a Catholic school. So there's some, seal of approval of, yes, oldest daughter's going to a religious school, but, is going to retain her Pentecostal beliefs and come back when she's done. Well, she took a world religions course, and from her, to quote her, she started to use scientific principles and was like, I'm pretty sure I'm right about religion and, Pentecostals' beliefs being the right ones, and was just going to take a magnifying glass and check the foundation. And she was poking at the base of a house of cards. And so she started, summer and winter break, coming back to the house. She started to share some of these early ideas about just about other religions and about just a broader perspective than what we had growing up. So she was very influential on my development as I was going through, musical theater.
You were able to talk to her.
I was able to talk to her about, my...
So she was the direct influence there.
Yes, absolutely, direct influence.
And she wasn't saying to you, oh, hey, you should watch this person on YouTube. She was just herself working through this.
There was a bit of both. She was just herself working through it, as well as she was able to connect with some people who didn't believe as well. And
former UPC people or just Christians, ex-Christians?
Through her time at St. Mary's, the college there. And she found some media. There's a podcast called The How To Heretic, which is hosted by ex-Mormons.
Yep.
And she shared that show with me to kind of, say, wow, look at these Mormons, they're crazy. And
right. It started getting too close to home.
Well, it was very close to home, but it was introduced to me at a time where I was, again, during that period of time where I was, the production of Macbeth, where I had that moment, that window of transitioning without realizing it from belief to non-belief, is also when she introduced that podcast.
Yeah, okay. So that had a role too. So this is all when you're 16?
17, 18,
you
yeah.
said, okay. Then, so did you at any point in that think to yourself, and maybe you did, maybe you didn't, I don't know, but like, did you think, my view of God is that he's a killjoy, and that he doesn't really care as much as everybody says he does, but am I sure it's the God, the real God, that is this killjoy? Or is it just the stuff I'm hearing from everybody about him, like from my parents? Because you must have known by that stage, hey, there are lots of Christian traditions. Mm-hmm. Not everybody has the same views.
Yeah.
Maybe some other views are a lot healthier of this God. The God, most Christians, struggle with this idea of God's Mr. No, particularly when they're growing up, because they associate all their parents saying no to things.
Mr. No?
Yeah.
I've never heard of this.
Well, the idea that you want to do all these fun things and your parents say no, basically God wouldn't want you to do that. So then God becomes Mr. No. That's just my idea. I haven't heard it anywhere. In other words, he's a killjoy.
Right.
Like the way you were describing him. My words, but the way you were describing him is that he's a killjoy. And but then but of course there's lots of life we do enjoy.
Yeah.
We do it, like there's a whole bunch of stuff that if God exists, he obviously, created a whole bunch of really, really fun things. Mm-hmm. So did you ever in that process go, maybe it's just the UPC that's nuts and, maybe it's God himself isn't quite like this? Or did that not really, wasn't really part of your
That
journey?
wasn't an idea that really populated. In part, I mean, I'm in Indiana. Most of the other denominations are pretty similarly fundamentalist.
Close enough that you don't see them as being like, oh, this is going to be a lot different when I go to the Baptist church.
Again, during that window where I was, in musical theater and changing my belief system, most of the people that I was interacting with were either like non-religious or agnostic, or pretty standard like Catholic or kind of interesting. There's like non-denominationalism is still a fundamental denomination. Like at least some of them are.
It depends. Yeah.
Yeah.
Christianity it really does.
It's very diverse.
Has a lot of diversity. It's why I always ask people. And I've interviewed a lot of Mormons and asked them. When you went from Mormonism to atheism, were you aware there's a whole spectrum of cataracts? Down the waterfall. It didn't necessarily have to be Niagara. And most people, it's just like once you lose confidence, it seems like it becomes Niagara. Yeah. And I can see why I ended up sort of doing the same thing in reverse. I went from atheism to Christianity, and it was a sort of Niagara, rather than why didn't I become first a philosophical theist and then slowly, like C.S. Lewis, famously, kind of slowly moved into Christianity. But it often doesn't work that way. And frankly, I think the way it often doesn't work that way is because we're
trained in black and white thinking.
Yeah, we're just not very nuanced. As human beings, we're not like all philosophers reflecting in detail carefully over long periods of time before we make big life decisions. How many people?
Everybody uses heuristics.
We by and large are motivated by a kind of intangible combination of intellect.
And
emotion, psychology, background. Like there's all sorts of things that influence our decisions. Anyway, so you went over Niagara and was, I don't believe any of this anymore.
Yeah.
And then I guess you went forward and ended up connecting with SSA at your college, or
so I found So again, my oldest sister's got a lot of credit for this. She was introducing me to a couple of other podcasts once I had come to some realizations, and then talked to my sister, and then had some realizations and talked to her, and eventually I'm on the same page of non-belief. Yeah. And she had just a couple of other podcasts lying around, and one of them was the Scathing Atheists. That you're probably aware of their existence. They're kind of, to my ears, a bit grating as far as like a total.
Yeah, they were next to my booth at one of the conferences.
Oh my!
An American Atheist convention.
Yeah. They're loud. They're abrasive, and
Scathing was the.
Yeah.
I didn't have to ask them why they had their name by the end of the conference.
Yeah. So it was through their podcast that I learned of a guy named Seth Andrews.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah.
And so his podcast, The Thinking Atheist, I kind of was attracted to it a lot more, as far as, I mean, again, he has just one of the best voices in the sphere. Yeah. And also his personal story was also an ex-Pentecostal.
It would be very powerful for your story.
And so it was through his podcast that I learned about the SSA.
Yeah, right, because of course.
I had never heard about it before, and so I'm like, oh my gosh, he's talking about a conference that's coming up in 4 months, and I'm like, okay, let's look into this. And I'm like, okay, this sounds exactly like what I want to do.
Yep.
And I work full time. I go to school, so I haven't had time to make a chapter on my campus and all that. But
you've come to two conferences. I've
come to two conferences, in large part because there's not a lot of space in Indiana for secular people to gather. Yep. The closest thing is there's a skeptics in the pub type situation, and I've never.
My nonprofit is called iPub.
Nice.
I thought I'd throw that in there.
iPub, UPub,
because the idea. Nice. Because the idea was a friend of mine who was ex-Christian became an atheist in his 20s, and I went the opposite direction. And since we were friends, I mean, we didn't go through the reverse journeys together. We met each other ex post facto, but we would talk a lot. And we were like, this is like our pub life. We go have a drink and talk about these things. And he finally suggested we should do a podcast. And then we created the podcast called The Divide. And we interviewed people for a while, for a few years. And that was before this current one, Faith in Question. Anyway, yeah, so the pub is a good place to have these conversations. So since then, you have have you had time? Do you feel like you've had time to sort of reflect at a larger level of like how's it gone with your family?
So family is a bit interesting. So my two parents are both religious. They would describe themselves as Pentecostal, but they have since they stopped going to church, they have a very harsh perspective on, quote, organized religion. They see the abuses that at least the UPC of, 10% post-tax income is supposed to be tithed. And that was a not insignificant amount of money when you've got 7 kids.
Yeah.
And they didn't see any return from the church community.
Yeah, and wages have barely increased since
1998 is when my oldest was born.
Yeah, that's a tough. Yeah, wages have not done much.
Yeah. And then there's, like, my mom, she's still very much so, like, a Pentecostal type of person.
I know what you mean.
Never has cut her hair, ankle-length skirts.
Do they still read their Bibles and
oh, yeah.
So they're still serious believers in that sense.
Absolutely.
But they think the church at large is by and large.
Just got it totally wrong and is failing society.
Do you ever, like, hearing them now, do you ever think, that, because they're sort of they didn't go over Niagara, right?
No.
They sort of went down a cataract or two, but they still held on to their beliefs. So do you guys talk about this?
No. So there's, again, I just described my parents' situation. With my siblings, my oldest deconstructed when she went to college, at a Catholic school. My second oldest brother, he's kind of on the same level as my parents, but he's gone weird because he's not been to a church, doesn't think that the churches have it figured out, but still is incredibly religious. And he has said that he doesn't care what happens to his life just as long as he goes to heaven and, dies. Like, he doesn't care about his life
It's like
at
Pascal's
all.
wager.
Right.
Like, I guess,
He's ready to die as soon as the time comes. And, like, at family gatherings, he doesn't talk to people. He just plays the piano and sings hymns, kind of loudly and in a way that kind of gets in the way of other people's conversation. And that's just how he is. I love him very much, but that's kind of grating to me. And then my next oldest...
A sibling is grating?
A sibling being grating. And my next oldest, he and I live together in an apartment in Bloomington. We both are atheists, and we have some different views. Are you familiar with the manosphere, the Joe Rogan, Jordan Peterson kind of world? He had kind of touched on that world for a moment before he deconstructed, and some of those more conservative ideals kind of still are like in the back of his mind and come out sometimes.
Yeah, that's really common. That's how Trump won the election, probably, is a wave of young men who kind of quasi-religious / secular views. I don't know what you call it. But it's a big phenomenon that the political world is trying to figure out how to harness both sides, actually.
Yeah. And so he and I are on the same page.
To their benefit,
Yeah. He and I are on the same page now. And then my younger brother, he kind of went through that same, entered the manosphere, lost his religion, but then he converted to Roman Catholicism. And if you've met, I don't know if it's a generic, like this happens to every convert to Roman Catholicism, but he is off the deep end, like wants to return to the type of Roman Catholicism of the 1800s.
They call it swimming the Tiber.
Swimming the Tiber?
Yeah. You convert to back to the church, the mother church. That's one way to do it. Or swimming back across the Tiber.
Okay.
So, because the Tiber, is in Rome by the Vatican.
Yeah.
The Catholics are pretty Catholic, if you haven't noticed.
They are. Yeah.
There's a definite tradition of kind of revival in the core conservative ranks of the Catholic Church,
Yeah.
which is quite an interesting phenomenon. And they have a pretty rich intellectual tradition that has never died.
I mean, that's the main reason they spread. I mean, that's a whole can of worms.
Thing, yeah. But
right.
they really. I'm just saying that there's like a lot of Protestants have swum the Tiber because they engage these Catholics online, that are philosophers and really, really smart people. And they're like, wow, our tradition wasn't quite as cerebral as this. They seem to really know what they're talking about. They're not ignorant about the Bible, and they know church history. So it becomes very powerfully persuasive to a lot of people. Yeah. So it doesn't surprise me that you have somebody in their family that's that way.
Yeah, and then
it's interesting to me that I'm not hearing in your story, and maybe this was a small part of it, or maybe it was irrelevant. I don't know. Is a sense of like, were you all familiar with C.S. Lewis as like a defender of the Christian faith?
My dad, instead of reading the Bible to us during a Bible study sometimes, he would just go through C.S. Lewis or tell us, this is your homework. Okay.
So they were trying to sort of pre-built into you an apologetics so that this would never happen.
Right.
But were you, I mean, let's face it, you were growing up, learning stuff is very, very different when your parents tell you to do stuff versus I'm now an independent thinker, and I'm going to read something on my own terms to figure out what I think of this. That's very different.
Yeah.
Particularly when you get into your 20s and you can think for yourself. If you've been a reader at all and you know how to read, you realize very quickly that if you're going through the history of the great ideas, you cannot not think very seriously about the question of God, because great thinkers across many different traditions, pagan and Christian, have thought of this and have offered a lot of ideas about it. So has that at any point yet become something you've looked at, like the way the classical Greeks thought about God, not Zeus, of course, but the philosophical concept of God, or did any Christian intellectuals along the way that were, I guess, apologists or something like that, offer some, something a little more weighty compared to what you knew?
So I was an avid reader. I don't know.
For you.
This is kind of a stereotype of homeschooled kids. They just devour books because they have access to books and not much else to do at home.
Yeah. That's great. I was a TV kid.
Yeah. Again, Pentecostals. We didn't have TV. We had books.
Yeah.
And I think, like, I read, the Iliad and various, we never really got into Greek philosophy.
Yeah.
But
I was thinking more of Christian thinkers who are way above the level of your typical
of C.S. Lewis.
Of a Lewis type, right? People who are in the real world of academia and actually have write books and publish in essays and journals and so on, who deal with the big questions about the very fundamental nature of reality, but in a way that's not the way Southern Baptists or PCA or whatever are, UPC are.
We were at the level of C.S. Lewis and Rush Limbaugh.
Okay, so I was curious if because you at some point, and I'm only speaking from my own journey. Maybe you will never relate to this. I don't know. I kind of wanted to go up the food chain. Someone gave me a C.S. Lewis book somewhere early on when I was interested in Christianity, and I was like, oh, this is definitely, another level that I hadn't really thought about, and I could tell. But I didn't want just the Christian side, I wanted to hear who are the other people who disagree with Lewis, and what do they say? And then you kind of go up the food chain of who have been some of the great thinkers in history that have offered ideas that have really shaped the way people think about God, who aren't all just fundamentalists, Bible people or whatever.
Yeah.
And it turns out there's a large number of really interesting suggestions about the very idea of God and about the nature of reality and what ultimately, is it a naturalistic world or not? And we can traffic in sort of what I would call low level pop stuff, the new atheists like Hitchens and Dawkins, these kind of people, or YouTube channels, or we can kind of go up to people who who like I was talking to somebody in one of these interviews about Anselm's argument. Anselm, around the turn of the millennium, 1000 A.D., offered the ontological argument for God, which, forget the argument right now. It's one of a bucket full of arguments for God in the tradition. But a lot of people will say, who are professional philosophers, that Immanuel Kant was really the first one to do a lot of damage to, or some even will say Kant, destroyed that argument, whatever. But that's 800 years between them. Mm-hmm. And then there's still modern defenders of Anselm's argument and serious philosophers. So I think, well, that's obviously an idea worth thinking about a little bit. Mm-hmm. That's who cares what a YouTuber thinks if they're not, because who knows how we're going to view their ideas in 10 years.
Right.
So I try to do that, and I was just curious if you have experienced that, if you've kind of dipped your toes into
Gone
the
up
larger,
the ladder of larger.
into the larger stream of ideas. That's all. Because you seem to me very sharp, and with you being a reader, I was just curious if I hadn't heard that yet, and I was curious if you've done that yet, and if not, I'd encourage it, regardless of what you end up doing. It'll just make you. You know Alex O'Connor, the guy. He's a YouTuber.
Not familiar.
Okay, so I mentioned him because he's a YouTuber, but he's getting his PhD, I think, in philosophy, and he's been humbled quite a bit, I think, in a good way. He's still a naturalist. He's not like he's become a theist or something, but he's clearly over. When I think he probably got into the YouTube world, I don't know, when he was 20, and he's now probably in his mid to late 20s, is my guess. But you can see, if you looked at him, at a video 5-6 years ago, you can see he's been humbled quite a bit because he's aware he had all these confident anti-religious ideas, and now he's a little bit like, well, there's some really impressive people whose ideas you have to weigh, and it's not always so easy to just dump it. It feels easy. And I feel the same on the reverse, by the way. Yeah. I ask Christians the exact same question. Have you kind of gone up the ladder a little bit?
Yeah.
Because you just trash atheists, but have you actually engaged in the best thinking atheists?
Right.
That's a lot harder.
There's a big difference between somebody who has, a well-researched, perspective on religion, be it on the atheist or religious side, and somebody who just goes and is happy clappy.
Yeah.
There's a big difference between where I'm at and like some of the I carpooled with somebody who's a high school student who is an atheist, and they were describing they were at one point just a very hard, rigid, like God is stupid, what are you doing, kind of a very abrasive type of person. But I feel like that on some level that's the same level on the flip side of the happy clappy types of you have not the dogma, you have the bells and whistles of higher thought, but you haven't really thought about it.
Yeah.
I haven't read those types of books. For one thing, I haven't had the time, and that's an issue that I know is epidemic, is people not having time to read. I'm reading books that are relevant to my career field, like Lean Production Simplified.
Of course. By the way, I want to be very clear. What I didn't mean was that, like a person's life, as you say, it takes a while to really understand, to even discover things like this. I was more just thinking, you seem genuinely curious about bigger ideas. So I'm thinking, what happens is you start to discover. It's just the beginning. Like you start to discover, oh, there's someone above this YouTuber who's actually, probably someone I should think about more. And then they get you into another person. And along the way, it's not that you have to we're not have to be philosophers. I just mean, it's just nice to start to consider these questions from like within what I'll call the great river of big ideas, which some of which, of course, predate Jesus.
Yeah.
And that
getting
kind of
into
thing.
Oh my gosh, what was it? The Pythagorean cult.
Yes.
A lot of Christian ideas kind of started there.
So, one final question: do you? What's your then take on how do you view Jesus now at this point?
How do I view Jesus?
Yeah.
So I think that, I guess it's sort of from a cultural context, not necessarily a historical context.
Yeah, just
The concept of
meant it
Jesus
personally.
brings people comfort, right? To say that we've got, an invisible guy who's watching you all the time and wants you to do well and to not make mistakes, and will take you to the afterlife once you're dead, right?
Well, how about
That's a very simplified
different, yeah.
version of
But
it.
I meant though more like the actual Jesus, like unless you're a mythicist, you think there was a historical guy, who lived, and there's these books that were written, whatever, 30, 40, 50 years. There's different scholarly views on how.
I personally take the mythicist view of, kind of, you think of like Paul Bunyan's stories, right? You start out, you've got a lumberjack, and he was a very impressive lumberjack, and then he's 7 foot tall, and he's got an ox, and then all of a sudden the story goes out until you've got a gigantic man mowing down entire forests with the one swing of his axe. Kind of the same.
Just to be clear, I'm a Minnesotan.
Minnesotan.
This is where the blue ox and all that is a big part of the lore of Minnesota. So you've just insulted my entire. You managed to knock Christianity through Minnesota.
Okay.
All right. No. Anyway.
So Jesus is kind
So you
of
take a legendary view, I think, is what you would call that,
Yes.
where there was this historical figure, and then the legends grew, and so on.
Exactly.
Yep.
And I think that this happens with just about all like religious figures. I mean, you think of the Dalai Lama. This happens with every new Dalai Lama. The story of, their reincarnation and all that, or with, Muhammad, or
Yeah.
Joseph Smith, or whoever. You have evidence of people becoming bigger than life over time as people.
To be sure.
Like, especially after they're dead and gone, and you
Even
can't
modern,
talk to them.
even modern presidents from not that long ago it can be a legend pretty quickly. There's a new book by a scholar from Princeton on. Are you familiar with Josephus, the historian Josephus?
I am not.
Jewish historian who was from an elite priestly family in Jerusalem, born shortly after the date that most people think Jesus was crucified, in the early 30s, let's just say. So Josephus was born within a few years, and then grew up and was a Pharisee and a Levitical priest, and eventually was one of the generals in the revolt when the Romans ended up sacking Jerusalem in 70 AD. His commanding general was Annas, the son of the high priest at the time Jesus was crucified. So Josephus is very interesting because he made a prediction that the general of the Roman armies at the time, Vespasian, would become emperor. And indeed, he became emperor. And so Josephus was spared and was given a villa in Rome, actually Vespasian's old house, to write a history of the war. And so Josephus did that. It's a great piece of work called The Jewish War. And then he also wrote a book called The Antiquities of the Jews. And in that book, he gives a whole history of Israel up to the time of when he's writing, which is around 90 AD. So he's interesting because he's a contemporary of the characters of the New Testament. And he references John the Baptist and James and how he was martyred, how John the Baptist was killed, and also references Jesus. And his little paragraph on Jesus has, for the last 150 years, scholars have had doubts about the integrity of this passage about Jesus. It's a summary of his ministry, his mission, and so on. And a lot of scholars thought it must have been cooked by Christians because somewhere along the way, because it seemed too positive. But this guy from Princeton has just released a book this summer, and it's one of the very few academic books you can get for free. You can go and it's called Josephus and Jesus, I think, and you can actually get the free PDF of the book online. They've made Oxford University Press has made it available for free. But he makes a very strong case. It's quite impressive that Josephus's account is original and hasn't been cooked, and he explains why he comes to that conclusion. But it would because he knew contemporaries of people who adjudicated the trial of Jesus and so on, and so these are likely his sources.
Right.
And not to mention he was alive with apostles and so on who were living in Jerusalem. But I say all that because that book and that account is would give a lot more credence to the story arc of the Bible being, at least the story arc of the Gospels would be then
It's the
validated.
question of which gospel is closer to the reality.
Yeah, I want to be clear.
Right.
I'm not saying that means the Gospels are all accurate. I'm not saying
Yeah.
this destroys your legendary view or
Yeah.
anything like that. I'm giving it as that would be a good thing to start with, to say, okay, how would I make sense of this Jesus? Well, let's try and figure out what do some of the earliest historians say who weren't Christians, like Tacitus or someone, or Suetonius, the Roman historians who refer to Jesus. And that's just good. That's just doing the good work of history. I want to be really clear. I don't mean this validates that the Gospels are
Right.
accurate. That'd be way too simplistic. I'm only saying just like with philosophy, you want to try and find, how would I begin to think about this? And I thought about it only because you were talking about the legendary theory, and it made me think of that book. I'm like in the middle of it right now.
And again, the fact that there's been so much attention directed at the existence of Jesus,
Yep.
from
Yeah.
again, there was kind of a point where the Hebrews started to include non-Hebrews in, like, taking them into their new offshoot of Judaism.
Yeah.
And that's what kind of Christianity started from. The fact that there's been so much talk about Jesus, or however you pronounce his name, lends credence to the idea that there probably was a guy, but it's the magical claims about him that don't hold up to the observable reality. And again, I would say I am a naturalist.
Yeah. Yeah.
That doesn't mean that
Of course, I'm not trying to write up to you other than just common sense. Like, of course, when I first read these books, I was in university. I did not read the Bible growing up at all, and I was mostly atheistic from like middle school on. And the first time I started reading these books, I was like, yeah, this is all just magical, legendary stuff. Just seemed obviously nonsense. And now I'll say that, but of course there were other things in these Gospels where it was like this, where you have like a long Sermon on the Mount or something, and you're like, well, I do like it that he's sticking it to the religious hypocrites. Like, there were elements where I was like, I actually kind of like that Jesus, went after that guy who was rich. But then I would be like, oh, but he did go after that guy who was poor too.
Right.
It wasn't always so predictable. And I'm truly fascinated, Ryan, by how there's nothing you've told me that surprises me. I think it's really sad. I've known a ton of, I couldn't stand Christianity when I was growing up, just from a distance. And I never thought I would be a Christian, and I was embarrassed at first. Like, I didn't even want to tell anybody I'd become a Christian just right away when I was converting to Christianity. And so that's all very I totally get all of that part of it, where it just still seems like nonsense. And I don't blame you for the way, like, your experience. I'm like, that would.
I mean,
yeah,
I was raised to believe that modern day miracles were real and that I could do them.
Right, and I find myself just thinking this is just all nonsense, madness. Like, why were they? I feel bad that was your exposure to Christianity, because I don't think of it like that. But
And
at the same
I know since moving out of my parents, I have met, wonderful people who are religious, and I respect them a lot. My boyfriend is, they've described it as hippie non-denominationalism. But
progressive Christianity.
Exactly.
Anyway. But I have such a different experience because Christianity was so distant to me growing up. And not like I didn't know, or there wasn't in Christianity throughout my family and stuff, but we didn't, living with my mom and my stepdads, we didn't just regularly go to church. And we certainly didn't live like people who took any of this stuff seriously. And so my exposure to it and the way I perceive it is just so different. And even among Christians, I'm being very honest now, I often am just sort of feel like,
I mean, I imagine...
Why do Christians say some of this stuff? Like, this is just not... Even people I appreciate and know, even some friends, occasionally, I just think, they don't seem to really reflect seriously on this stuff. And I don't relate to it. I'm just being honest. I don't relate to it. I'm way more serious about it and have... So, whatever. I still retain a certain skeptical mindset toward any claim anyone makes. Sometimes especially among Christians, because I take it more seriously. And so anyway, I just say to you that that I find it hard. I hate listening sometimes to these stories and just thinking, gosh, I don't really blame you for the way you feel. But I also have a very different experience, and it just is what it is. I'm not going to change anything. I'm just saying to you that and my children have some different views from me on some things, and we get along really well, and we talk about it.
Yeah.
And I really, there's not like some big barrier to being able to discuss that we disagree and so on. Anyway, great interview. I mean, I really wish I could talk to you longer.
Yeah.
But
we've got the next thing to go on.
But yeah. So I appreciate you stopping for the interview.
Absolutely. Thank you.